Welcome to The Fully Lived Life, a podcast for those who are longing to pursue the full life and want to break free from anything that holds them back. Listen in as two friends, a psychologist, Dr. Mary, and a life coach, Gillian, talk about life, love, and purpose through the lens of faith, science, psychology, and life experiences.
Oh, hello, Mary.
Hey, Gillian. How are you doing today?
You know what? The self-compassion test. Could you put your Dr. Mary hat on and just
All right.
Seriously, I kind of knew because I'm growing in my self-awareness and I know where I'm very hard on myself and harsh with myself. So yeah, it was like hard to do.
Yeah, I know. I know.
Okay, well, we'll get to that.
We'll get to that.
So how are you doing, my friend?
I'm doing good. Yeah.
Okay.
I'm doing well. A little bit distracted, if I were to be honest.
Okay. Is there a reason that you're distracted?
Well, I'm getting emails coming in. Part of the problem with having all these devices going is that I've got 4 devices here. I've got 2 computers, my iPad with our notes, and then my phone off to this side. So
I know, it's ridiculous.
I have it all turned off, although it took me a while to figure out how to turn off the notifications. So listeners, have you heard some dinging going on? I think I figured that out. So I'm a little distracted because of that. I've got this project looming that is going to be fun to do, but yeah.
So you got stuff in your mind, and
yes, I have to be.
We're juggling all these things, and and actually, I had a little disappointment. Well, actually, a major disappointment. So, I was supposed to have gone to BC to visit my son.
Yeah.
And with the things that are going on in Alberta, because we were going to be traveling from BC, doing a road trip into Alberta, with the COVID situation there, and my son got COVID.
Yes.
So our plans, got thwarted.
Yeah.
So I'm quite disappointed because I was seeing myself in the mountains as this, awesome hiker with my epic backgrounds of mountains and lakes and trees. And, I love nature. So I'm feeling a little bit bummed out that didn't happen.
Yeah. No, when I heard the news that trip was canceled, I felt really, really sad for you because it just feels like one more disappointment upon another disappointment.
Yeah.
Because this year has been, this past year and a half has been cancellations, disappointments, and all that. Like, how do you stay optimistic in all of that and focusing on joy and all that?
It's tricky. And do we look forward to things, with this kind of bated breath, like if they happen?
Exactly.
Like, I love anticipation. I've shared this with our listeners before. My sister Helena, when she was little, anticipation was tisha-pishin.
Yeah, that's right.
And we always say there's too much tisha-pishin, like when we're anticipating things.
That's right.
So I quite love anticipating things. I like looking forward to things. It kind of keeps me going sometimes. So this was a big disappointment. And, not getting to see my kid and his beautiful wife and spend time with them and their new kitten who's a real laugh riot. They've got this new little kitten named Bilbo who...
What a great name.
I love mischievous animals.
Yes.
And this cat is hysterical. So I miss him too,
Yeah. No, I hear you.
So listeners, we're in this together, man. And
we know it's not been easy. We know it continues to be difficult. Anticipating good things and them not happening or things going unexpectedly. Like I know a lot of you have your kids in school and you're just kind of waiting with bated breath whether they're going to have to stay home because there's an outbreak or whatever it might be. So this whole thing about self-compassion comes at the perfect time.
It does.
For how we can be resilient to handle the realities of life, the ups and downs, and how we can still stay hopeful and connected, but also tender towards ourselves when we need that soothing. Like, I hope you had a good, whether it's a hot bath, glass of wine, whatever it is that you need to do to soothe yourself. I hope you're able to do that and you're continuing able to do that.
Fortunately, I was able to get a few days away at my sister's cottage up in Tobermory.
Amazing.
And
good. Glad.
Yeah, I took some beautiful meals up. We had a wood fire going. I read a new book. I took long walks. I got wet. So it was all good, but not the same, but okay.
The other thing, too, is I think part of resilience is to say that I can tolerate disappointment. Like, I wouldn't want you to miss out on the joy of anticipation, which, by the way, they have found that before a good event, it's the anticipation leading up to it. It's the actual event, and then it's the memories that you can reflect on. Like, that's the whole entire arc of the experience, and you want to, enjoy all of that. So don't be afraid of disappointment. It's hard, but it's not worth shutting yourself down by saying, I'm not going to let myself anticipate anything because it might go away anyway.
That's right. So all that said, we're going to dive into part 2 of this idea of perfectionism, and we're going to talk a little bit about anxiety today. And I want to unpack that with you, Mary, because in Brené Brown's book, she talks about the connection between shame and perfectionism. And we talked a little bit about that in our previous episode. But I want to also, she talks about shame being the root of perfectionism. And I want to dig into this idea of anxiety now, because I know that's a big word. And again, with perfectionism, anxiety is also a loaded word. It can be a word that we run from and a word that we don't actually want to address.
Right.
Or we can say, I don't deal with anxiety.
Right.
Right?
Or I don't have any anxiety.
So could you tell me a little bit about what the difference between worry and anxiety might be?
Well, first of all, can I answer the question about anxiety? That if we're honest with ourselves, 100% of us deal with anxiety. It just may not feel like anxiety because we've labeled it something else. We've labeled it caution. We've labeled it whatever, but we all do. And we also all worry. And worry is just the act of anticipating something that possibly could go wrong and spending some time thinking about it. So anxiety and worry are just natural parts of being human, because you come into this world as a child, and at a certain point you start to realize, shoot, bad things happen. And things don't go the way that I like, and we can feel a whole host of negative emotions, and that's all natural human responses. Anxiety itself was actually designed in our bodies to gear us up to respond to possible danger or situations we have to solve or problems that need to be resolved. I mean, that's part of what anxiety does for us. So when we dismiss that we are experiencing anxiety, we're actually avoiding looking at things that need to be addressed. And so perfectionism often, when I say to people, tell me about some of your weaknesses, when I do interviewing, they'll say things like, oh, I work too hard, or I do struggle with perfectionism, as if it's a badge to say, look how great I actually am, when really what you ought to be saying is, I can get anxious when things don't go according to plan. I can get anxious when my work isn't up to some standard. That's being honest, because then you can respond in a way that's actually helpful for you.
Good. That's good stuff. Okay. And I do like this idea that Brené Brown talks about anxiety as kind of being a spectrum, right? There's worry.
Yeah.
There's kind of general anxiety, and then there's like anxiety disorders.
Right.
Right. And I think sometimes because we've identified that we don't have an anxiety disorder, we've determined we don't have anxiety.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah. And anxiety plays out in so many different ways in our life that we're just calling something else.
Of course. Yeah. And I think going back to our previous episode, a lot of our anxiety is also about the standard that we've imagined. So when we talk about the standards that we're trying to live up to, or we're putting on others, are they imagined Are they implied by someone else, or are they historical?
Right.
Like, have we been raised in a family where those standards are set, right? Or are they imagined because of social media?
Right.
You know, when I walk into the kitchen and my kitchen's a disaster and I'm making macaroni and cheese for dinner instead of some beautiful meal in my gorgeous kitchen,
Right.
like, is that causing me like this anxiety about who I am?
Right.
Is it causing how I'm showing up in the world, what kind of
Yes.
person I am?
Right.
I think that's a really
goes
good
back
question.
To the conclusions that people are making when they feel anxious.
Yeah.
If you talked about the spectrum of anxiety from what all of us experience to where it becomes a disorder. And when we talk about disorders, because it affects the ability of the person to cope with day-to-day life responsibilities. But if I can sort of talk a little bit about what's happening as we're experiencing anxiety, that it's a physiological response. It's actually a gift in its original intent. So anxiety is we face a perceived possible danger or a situation that needs addressing. Our body gets flooded with adrenaline to be able to gear ourselves up to deal with it. Our thinking is sharper, our responses are faster. All these good things are happening in our body so that we can address the thing. The challenge is with chronic anxiety, when that is the constant response, we start to see danger and things that aren't actually dangerous. So we become sort of hypervigilant. And in the early stages of anxiety, it's fine. Our body can tolerate it, but over time, when we're constantly hypervigilant and always responding as if there's danger, it begins to wear away at our body. So that's part of the challenge with anxiety. One of the strategies to think about, and I'm digressing a little bit, but I think
go ahead.
Yeah, is that if you recognize that you've had the surge of anxiety, it's happening. You don't really have control over it at that point. It's happening. So you kind of have to do a couple of things. One is you have to tell your body you're safe. And it could be as simple as we've talked about the happiness hacks. If you don't remember that podcast, go back and listen to it. Simply going for a walk, going for exercise, hugging your child, petting your dog, things to tell your body that, okay, you're not in danger. So that's one thing. The other thing you can do is actually take your anxiety and take advantage of that surge that's happening and turn it into more, if you label it, excitement. So it's like you're taking that energy, you're going excitement to be able to do well on this thing, face that fear, challenge myself. Adam Grant has done some research around that.
Oh, yeah.
He's found that to be very, very effective. Anyway, all that to say is that if we can learn to identify that we have anxiety or have anxious moments and to then make friends with our anxiety, it can actually help us. If we don't and we ignore it and we avoid it, it can start to harm us. It can start to hold us back. Yeah. And I think perfectionism is one of those great areas to identify where we might have anxiety in our life.
It's so good, Mary. And I think, when you talk, sometimes I get like a visual picture in my head as you're talking.
Yeah.
And I was thinking about, I was watching the wildfires in BC this year and how people have a few moments notice. They know the fires are coming, but they have a few moments to pack their car and get out.
Right.
And how razor sharp that anxiety, when it kicks in, your priorities are pretty sharp right away.
Yes.
Right?
True. Yeah.
You get your pets, you get your kids, you get your passports and your valuables and jump in the car and go. Right. The rest doesn't matter. So it makes you laser sharp. So I like this idea that we can take the anxiety and we can use it for something beneficial.
Right. Exactly.
So and clearly we can train ourselves to do that.
Yeah. Okay. And one of the questions I would ask people, or one of the suggestions I would, is for people to start to pay attention to when anxiety is showing up. So you talk about worrying. So what do you worry about?
Yeah.
Like, what do you spend a lot of your time mulling over in your mind? And is it helpful thinking?
Yeah.
If it's not, and it's just round and round and round, then you're probably worrying.
That's right. Good. Yeah. Okay. So can we talk a little bit about radical generosity and radical graciousness to ourselves.
Love that.
To combat anxiety and worry. And so I'm just going to identify a few things that I think we can camp on for a few minutes.
Okay.
Can we identify the inner critic that's going wild when we're struggling with worry or anxiety?
Yeah.
Because I know my inner critic is off the chart.
Right.
And we both did the self-compassion test that we talked about in the previous episode.
Yes.
And quite frankly, I kind of knew what my answers were going to be in advance. And I wasn't disappointed.
Well, there you go. You anticipated and you weren't disappointed. Awesome.
I turned my anxiety into anticipation.
So tell us what happened. How did you score? Come on.
Okay, hang on. I got to bring it up here.
Yeah.
Okay, my overall score was 2.07.
Right. And so I'm just reading the scoring here that if it's a scale of 1 to 5 and a scale of around 3 means you're kind of average.
Right.
So you're below average.
I'm below average, but...
in your self-compassion.
Right. But then when I look at my self-judgment...
Whoa.
It's pretty high.
Yeah.
Like, not high as in good. High as I'm a little bit of an overachiever in that one.
Well, and, we have standards.
You betcha. I got really high standards. And over-identification was high, as well as isolation.
What's over-identification? Remind me.
Over-identification was, oh my goodness.
I'm putting you on the spot.
I know.
Well, I know the isolation is how you withdraw when you're feeling like you feel like lonely and on your own, when you feel like you've messed up.
Okay. Well, over-identification indicate less self-compassion. So I've got less self-compassion overall in that. I'm over-identifying with things externally.
Okay, gotcha.
And owning them.
Right.
So yeah, Dang. So if you did this, listeners, yikes. There might be some ouchies there for you. Or maybe you know yourself well enough and you go, yeah, I'm not surprised. That's something I really need to work on.
Right. Right. And again, the whole idea of identifying your areas of growth is for growth. It's not to then beat yourself up. Oh, man, I really suck at self-compassion. It's like, okay, well, I could learn to do better in self-compassion for sure.
That's right. So when we're talking about radical graciousness and radical generosity, when we identify our inner critic, which is like, oh, yeah, of course, I suck at that. What are the areas of focus of our inner critic? Like that was a really good exercise because do I isolate myself when I'm not meeting a standard? Do I over-identify with something as the cause of it? Am I harsh on myself? So I can look at that inner critic and go, oh, this is really explaining some areas that I really need to grow in.
Right.
Are you a bully to yourself?
Exactly. Like, do you say things to yourself that you would never say to another human being? Like,
that's right.
How many times do you call yourself stupid or idiot?
That's right.
You wouldn't imagine somebody saying that to your kids.
Oh, well.
Exactly.
Mess with the grandma.
Exactly. And meanwhile, you say it to yourself.
Yeah. So are you a bully to yourself, calling yourself names, demeaning yourself, setting impossible bars to achieve?
Yeah.
Like, what is the thinking behind this inner critic? Are you falsely believing that self-criticism is a way of self-improvement? Right? Like, we saw this in some parenting when the parent is overly critical towards the child, thinking that all this correction is for their good, it's for their benefit. Right. They're going to grow with correction. Well, that doesn't work.
Yeah. There's a scene that comes to mind. It's a very, very old movie. It's called The Joy Luck Club, one of my all-time favorites. And there's a scene where the mother is criticizing her food because in the Asian culture, that's what you do. And she's intending that she's going to get people go, no, this is delicious. But what happens was the daughter's boyfriend ends up going, oh, no, you just need to put some soy sauce. And everyone goes, anyway, all that to say is a lot of times for me, when I criticize myself, it's actually to protect myself against the possibility somebody else is going to criticize me because I'm already on top of it. I got
Bingo,
it.
bango, bongo.
Yeah.
Because if you come to my house unannounced, and my house is a mess, what's the first thing out of my mouth?
My house is a mess.
My house is a mess. I'm gonna call out my stuff before you get a chance to.
Exactly.
It's a preemptive move.
That's right. To protect myself from feeling criticized and shamed.
Yeah.
But we actually are making ourselves feel shame because chances are the person wasn't going to say that, wasn't even noticing that.
No, that's right. And we're just going around pointing out all our flaws so that they don't see them.
That's right.
And then we're drawing attention to them.
Well, and not just that, we are diminishing. Like when I'm giving you, okay, I'm going to call you on this.
Uh-oh.
The number of times I've given you a compliment.
I know.
And you've pushed it away by saying something negative in response. Like, to be honest, it hurts me because I'm genuinely wanting to give you this affirmation. And it's like it's gone into some sort of, void.
It's gone into the cyberspace. I get that. And I thank you for calling me out on that because it is something I have to work on for sure.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Right? And that starts with this radical generosity towards myself where I can receive compliments.
Yes.
Even if I don't feel them, I can receive them for others because you feel it towards me.
Right.
Yeah. And, sorry, I just lost my page here. So this idea of the inner critic, so call it out. If you criticize somebody else, does it motivate them or does it cause them to shut down? Well, of course, it causes them to shut down. So you're causing your own self to shut down when you're doing this bullying action on yourself.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It's kind of like a self-flagellation, right?
It is. Yeah.
So what generous words could I use towards myself when I mess up? Well, we've owned some of that with our technical stuff. We're learning as we go. It's not perfect. And there's a scramble behind the scenes. And you and I talk about it pre-podcast, like the amount of effort we're putting into all these chords and plugins, but we're learning.
Yes.
This is a thing I didn't know about, and I'm learning it.
Exactly.
And I'm kind of getting better every week.
And it doesn't have to be perfect.
No.
So I'm trying not to be distracted by the fact that the camera on this particular computer is kind of like continues to adjust the light. So I go dark and light. It's okay.
Exactly. Right.
Yeah.
So what generous words could I use towards myself? And can I affirm myself in my growth?
Yeah.
You know what? That souffle didn't turn out, but I tried something new. And I'm sure the next time, it'll be better. Or maybe it still tastes good. Maybe it flopped, but it still tastes good.
Exactly.
Whatever it is, if we're learning a new language or we're trying a new thing or we're risking in a relationship, we can affirm ourselves and be compassionate towards ourselves and generous with our words and thoughts towards ourselves.
I love that.
Just the way we want to be with another human being.
Yeah.
Can we identify the areas that we're especially hard on ourselves? So step back. Notice any themes. Notice when you're deflecting the compliment. Notice when you're laughing something off or mocking yourself.
Yeah.
Right? Or calling out your imperfections publicly before to shield yourself. What am I doing that for? Get realistic with your expectations of yourself and others. Is the bar just way too high?
Remember what we've talked about before. Integration is not perfection.
No.
It's often coming to terms with this level of self-acceptance and compassion that it is what it is. I am human. I have my strengths and my weaknesses, and I can bear both of them because that's part of being human. And that's part of like when I can now not get so bent out of shape about the weaknesses or my mistakes and just continue to say, I'm growing, I'm learning.
Yeah. And cutting yourself some slack.
Some slack, exactly. Yeah.
Notice any language that is always, never, and should.
Yeah.
Notice when you're saying those things or thinking those things. Or you're saying them about somebody else. You never, you always, right? Or you should.
The should. Yeah. I always wanted to get a T-shirt that says should with a big round X out of it.
I agree.
Yeah.
And the should look like a pile of poop.
Yes.
Yes.
There you go.
Practice self-care, giving yourself a break.
Yeah.
Would I say these things that I've just said to myself to a loved one? We just talked about that. And remember, we're on a progress path, not a perfection path.
Yeah.
Ease the timelines and practice patience with yourself.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about how to overcome this idea of perfectionist tendencies and with the anxiety behind it.
Yeah.
Can you talk to us a little bit about the standards that we set that induce anxiety, where we might need to relax things a little bit and question that?
I think if we can start to, again, pay attention to where anxiety shows up in our body, in our emotions, and in our thoughts, we can start to then track what are the themes that are coming up. And as we track the themes, we can then identify, like, what are the standards associated with these themes? And are these standards realistic? Are they even actually part of what I value in my life? Is this what I want my life to stand for? A clean kitchen? Or do I want my life to be more about connection and relationships, right? So, identify, like this, again, is a journey. So, like, start to identify where you might have anxious thoughts, where you might actually feel anxiety in your emotions and in your body. If you can start with that and then keep a journal of it. A good friend of ours, she's actually, her name is Julie Marquis, and she's got something that is called a daily, you're not going to be able to see this, but it looks like this. And it's
so good.
Daily bullet journal. And, you could go on her website, juliemarquis.com, and just purchase it, or you can just do it for yourself. And what she's trying to help people do is a daily tracking of my thoughts, my behavior, my feelings, and then starting to see if there's any themes that's coming up. So if you can do that, then you can start to see what might be happening that's spurring on the anxiety and the perfectionism. And you can learn to take that anxiety, which is a natural human response, like I said, and start to use it for good in your life rather than to hold you back or for bad.
Yeah. I love that. And I would affirm that the resources from Julie Marquis, and I've seen her practice that in her own life. So I know it comes out of her own, not only her own education and her practice, but also her own practice of doing this.
Yeah, and she's got a ton of free resources on her website. So we'll put her website on the show notes so that you can look that up and just get some free resources. But the main thing is, like I said, to be starting to track and notice, recognize, own it, and then you can start to make the shifts once you identify what you're dealing with.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that I'm going to just flip back to my BC trip cancellation. So one of the things I was noticing about myself as we were getting closer to the time where we had to make a decision about whether to go or not, was I was back to not sleeping well. I was back to kind of worst case scenario thinking. And I caught myself a couple of times going, oh, you're really stressed out about this.
Right.
Like you're dealing with a lot of anxiety about this.
Right.
You're not facing it. You're trying to massage it, fix it, control it. And so one day I just took myself out for a coffee. I went to Starbucks. I sat in the parking lot. Went, what are you anxious about?
Right.
And I just started to name it out loud. Well, you're watching the news with the news that's going on in Alberta. You're watching the case counts go up. Your plans have changed now because the dream of the vacation you had is being switched.
Right.
we had a bunch of difficulties with getting a rental car and stuff like that. And there were sort of all these blocks. And so in my mind, I had this perfect trip planned.
Right.
And it was not meeting up to that standard.
Right.
And so we actually my husband and I sat down that afternoon and we're like, okay, it's not this anymore.
Exactly. Oh, that's so good.
It is
Facing
not
reality.
It is no longer this. So what is it? Like, what could we make it be that would meet? What were the goals of the trip?
Right.
Visit our son and daughter-in-law, have time alone, and do a bit of a road trip.
Right.
And we still achieve those, yes. Yeah. And so we worked through that, and then, of course, my son got sick. So anyway, I think it was really good for us to just go, why am I feeling anxiety? And identify what I dreamed of and what was actually happening were not materializing. And I was struggling with disappointment.
Right. Yeah. And it's amazing when you give yourself self-compassion and you accept, like you said, radical
generosity and radical graciousness.
Yeah. And just to kind of be okay with all those feels that you have because you're human.
Yeah.
And to kind of let that sit. And then, of course, out of that, you made good choices for yourself. How do I take good care of myself? How do I regroup and think about how we can achieve our goals in different ways, which you talked about going to your sister's cottage, where you were able to spend time in nature with your husband and all those kind of things.
Yes. And so we were able to go, what we did was we looked at the big picture. What were we trying to achieve? Then we thought, okay, what obstacles are we bumping up against?
Right.
How is this shifting? And then we went to the next thing, which was compromising.
Right.
We had to compromise 2 or 3 times, too, because it kept shifting, and we went to a compromise. Was it what we originally intended? No. Was it great? Yes.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing it. That's a really great example, a real-life example of what happens in how we can identify, give ourselves self-compassion, track, shift, and then decide differently for yourself. All of those things are really important strategies. So thanks for sharing. I think listeners, if you can go back to the basics of identifying and admitting that you do have anxiety, as we all do, and trying to identify the areas that it may come up, what worries you may have, what feelings in your body, I think that's a really great place to start. And that can help you then begin to identify themes. Now, if you're finding that it is beyond your ability to handle or identify, please get some help. Anxiety is very treatable. Not, as I always say, that we're trying to get rid of it or eradicate it, because that's impossible and it's actually getting rid of your humanity. But it's feeling a sense of confidence that I can cope. And I am resilient, and I can get through whatever difficulty I'm getting through. So if that's the case for you, where you feel overwhelmed by the thought of even looking at your anxiety, please get help. Don't do this alone.
Right. Absolutely. And I would say, for a life coaching tip, what are the standards you've set for yourself?
Yeah.
Are those standards real, or are they historical?
Yeah.
Have you inherited those standards?
Oh, good.
How did you come to set those standards, or were they set for you?
Yes.
And what is a more realistic set of standards that you want to live by? Not you have to live by, but you choose to live by.
Your values.
And in your ideal world, what standards would really matter and which ones would be meh?
Right. Yes, love that. And if you have written your manifesto that we talked about at the end of last season and the beginning of this season, go back and look at that, because your values are invested in that or embedded in that. If you haven't written already, this may be a good time for you to start to jot notes about things that are important to you related to how you actually want to live your life, and to actually call out those false standards that you don't want to live your life by.
Awesome.
Thanks for tuning in. That was
all right.
All right.
That was a good one.
Yeah.
All right. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to the Fully Lived Life podcast. We hope you found it encouraging and helpful. Be sure to follow or subscribe so that you never miss a new episode. And if you enjoyed our show, please help spread the word by sharing with your friends and family and posting on your social media. Thanks for listening, and tune in to our next episode.